going to be watching and talking about this case, so let's break it down. I'm here with Melanie Israel, a policy analyst in Heritage's DeVos Center. She's going to be answering our questions and your questions as well, so please drop those comments below. All right, let's jump in. Melanie, tell us more about Dobbs versus Jackson. Who is Dobbs and what do they want?
So this case has to do with the state of Mississippi's law that was passed back in 2018. That is a law that protects unborn children after 15 weeks. And so this case before the Supreme Court, it's an abortion provider challenging the state of Mississippi and their pro-life law.
So who's the abortion provider? Is that Jackson
Women's Health? Yes. And then Dobbs is the state party for Mississippi.
Okay. So how is Mississippi most likely to make their case that abortion should be banned after 15 weeks?
So Mississippi is asking the court a very straightforward question, and the court is going to be answering this question for the very first time since Roe versus Wade, and that is whether or not all pre-viability bans on abortion are unconstitutional. And so, of course, the state of Mississippi says that they should be able to protect unborn life before viability, and therefore the court needs to do away with the arbitrary and unworkable viability standard.
So just so that we could stay at a 101 level, can you just be exactly clear on what viability means?
Yes, it's a really important concept. So viability is referring to the point at which a child can survive outside the womb. And of course, in 1973, when Roe was decided, that viability marker was roughly 28 weeks. But of course, now we know that that point is happening much earlier. There are children who have been born 22 weeks and even earlier who are surviving and thriving today. And so that's why we have this problem with viability being a very arbitrary and unworkable standard, because it's not one single moment in every pregnancy for every child. There's so many other factors at play depending on that child's specific health circumstances, the capabilities of a NICU, the skill of a doctor. There's so many factors that go into play when you're talking about viability. And so the court has never really justified why viability.
Yeah, I think that conservatives get really excited when we hear you talk about that, because we all have, we imagine those sonogram, those ultrasound pictures in our head, and we know what technology has shown us now that it certainly couldn't show us then. And to me, that sounds like a really great argument that's going to be made.
Exactly. So much of what the state of Mississippi has said in their petition to the court is talking about the science, because again, we know so much more than we did in 1973. And really, Roe has been a barrier to states being able to enact laws that are rooted in modern science.
So the defense's argument is that a ban is unconstitutional. How exactly do they think that is unconstitutional?
So really what they're trying to say is that the court should not overturn Roe, and that we need to keep our laws frozen in 1973, essentially. Their brief that was just filed at the court really doesn't present a whole lot of new arguments. It's simply saying that we need to keep the status quo, which, again, Mississippi and others are saying it's unworkable and arbitrary.
So even liberal constitutional lawyers have said that they're on shaky ground with that, right?
Right, exactly. Even Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself has criticized Roe, and it's something that I think a lot of Americans don't even realize just how permissive Roe is, for one thing, and then what would happen in the absence of Roe, which of course would mean states would be able to enact abortion policy that reflects people in those states.
So the United States is 1 in 7 countries that allows abortions at this point. What do polls say about how Americans feel about that?
Yeah, it's such an important question. We see so often the mainstream media say things like, most Americans support Roe v. Wade. And really, that's asking the wrong question, because I think a lot of folks don't really understand how radical Roe is. Because of Roe, we're one of only 7 countries that allows elective abortion after 5 months of pregnancy for any reason.
5 months.
And it's just so radical. We're in the company of countries like China and North Korea. It's really not, it's not a good club to be in. So the real question is, look at the polls that ask Americans what they think about abortion specifically. And there it's really clear. Most Americans support policies that are far more life-affirming than what's permitted under the Roe v. Wade regime.
So just wanted to say hello again to everybody out there who's watching. Please ask questions. We're here to answer them. Melanie's friendly and here to answer those questions. We know this is a tough subject. Maybe you guys want to know how you could ask or talk to friends and neighbors about this subject. So feel free to ask those questions. So the left is freaking out about all of this. As we know they did with the Heartbeat Act in Texas, they really have lost it on this. And it's not just their rhetoric, they're actually taking action in Congress right now. What are they doing?
So one of the things that has been happening in Congress is that Democrats in both the House and the Senate, as well as President Biden, have committed to try to roll back long-standing consensus policy in federal spending measures. So that includes things like the Hyde Amendment, which says that taxpayer dollars are not going to pay for elective abortions. That is a policy that they are actively trying to repeal right now in conversations about annual federal spending measures. Tomorrow, the House is going to be voting on a bill called the Women's Health Protection Act. And unfortunately, that bill doesn't actually have much to do with women's health. A better name for it would be the Abortion on Demand Act. It's being characterized as a bill that would codify Roe versus Wade. In reality, what it would do is it would repeal long-standing pro-life laws that have been enacted at the state level, things like ultrasound requirements, reflection periods. It would prevent states from protecting children from abortion based on whether they're a boy or a girl, or if they're diagnosed with Down syndrome. And it would also prevent states from being able to enact future pro-life laws. And so really it's a piece of legislation that is geared toward taking away the American people's ability to have any say whatsoever on abortion policy.
When does you said tomorrow they plan to vote?
That's right. They plan to vote on that tomorrow, sometime on Friday.
Do you know how likely the Senate is to pass this if the House were to pass it?
Yeah, you know, I think this is one of those cases where all eyes turn once again to the Senate filibuster. That 60 vote threshold is very difficult to overcome, and that's by design, because the Senate is meant to be the world's most deliberative body, where people have to come together and find consensus, and the Women's Health Protection Act is not a consensus policy.
So we have a question from our folks watching. They want to know why this is a federal issue and why we can't just leave it to the states.
Well, really, overturning Roe would turn things back to the states. It would mean that states like Texas would be able to pursue life-affirming policy. Now, that also means that maybe a state like California would take a different direction. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it actually means to overturn Roe. And on the left, a lot of people are presenting it as if you overturn Roe, all abortions would be banned. And that's not exactly how those mechanisms would work.
Can you explain a little bit how it would work? What would happen? Let's say all goes well in Dobbs versus Jackson and they uphold the ban in Mississippi. How does that then affect the other states? It kind of depends on exactly what the opinion says. A lot of this is going to be wait and see, because it might be a very narrow opinion. They might say, no, this Mississippi can't enact this law. We really don't know for sure exactly what's going to happen. Generally speaking, if Roe was overturned, it would turn this
policy question back to the states. Now, some states have trigger laws that are designed to go into effect and protect life before viability in the event that Roe is overturned. But then you've also seen other states go a completely different direction and say that they want to protect abortion access at all costs whatsoever, regardless of what happens at the Supreme Court. So it really would turn into a state-by-state conversation, but we can't say for sure exactly what would happen until we have that opinion in front of us.
We have one more question. They'd like to know if you could talk a little bit on the issue of Down syndrome children being targeted and how unborn children diagnosed with Down syndrome are more likely to be victims of abortion.
Right. So this is something that we see happening all across the country. In fact, some of the folks watching today might remember seeing some headlines about how in Iceland they have essentially eliminated all people with Down syndrome because all babies that are diagnosed with Down syndrome have been aborted. Babies with Down syndrome are aborted at much higher rates. In fact, we also hear people talking about how they have been encouraged to choose an abortion based on that diagnosis and have, thankfully chosen life anyway, but have talked about how horrible it was for them to feel pressured to abort their child. And so again, legislation like the Women's Health Protection Act would take away a state's ability to protect those children with Down syndrome. And really, again, I just have to reiterate how far-reaching, how broad in scope the Women's Health Protection Act would be in trying to roll back pro-life policies like that.
So if they were to pass the Women's Health Protection Act, did I say that correctly? Mm-hmm. If they were to pass that in the House and Senate, what effect would that have on Dobbs versus Jackson?
I think we can look to what Democrats in Congress are saying about this bill. They've been having press conferences and doing all kinds of media appearances. Their goal for this bill is to protect abortion at all costs, regardless of what the Supreme Court does. They want to, quote unquote, codify Roe. Again, it goes much farther than Roe, regardless of what happens at the Supreme Court. So basically what they're trying to do is say, whether or not the court says that these pro-life laws are constitutional, we here in Congress are going to say no more enacting pro-life laws, and we're going to repeal all of the existing ones.
All right, well, can you tell us when the Supreme Court plans to hear Dobbs versus Jackson?
Yes, breaking news just this week. The court has scheduled the case to be heard on December 1st. And then, of course, we never know exactly what day the court is going to release an opinion, but it would likely be sometime in the summer of 2022.
All right. Well, thank you for being here and breaking down this issue with us. If you guys liked what you were listening to here with us, you can listen to it further on the Heritage Explains podcast. And we'll see you next time on Heritage Explains Live.